George Vancouver. Captain George Vancouver, June 22, 1757, May 10, 1798, was a British officer of the Royal Navy best known for his 1791–95 expedition, which explored and charted North America's northwestern Pacific coast regions, including the coasts of what are now the American states of Alaska, Washington, and Oregon, as well as the province of British Columbia in Canada. He also explored the Hawaiian Islands and the southwest coast of Australia. Vancouver Island and the city of Vancouver, British Columbia are named for him, as is Vancouver, Washington. Mount Vancouver of Yukon and Alaska, on the Canadian-American border and New Zealand's sixth highest mountain, are also named for him. Early life and career. George Vancouver was born in the seaport town of King's Lynn, Norfolk, England, on June 22, 1757 as the sixth, and youngest, child of John Jasper Vancouver, a Dutch-born deputy collector of customs, and Bridget Berners. In 1771, at the age of 13, Vancouver entered the Royal Navy as a young gentleman, a future candidate for midshipman. He was selected to serve as a midshipman aboard HMS Resolution, on James Cook's second voyage, 1772–1775, searching for Terra Australis. He also accompanied Cook's third voyage, 1776–1780, this time aboard Resolution's companion ship, HMS Discovery, and was present during the first European sighting and exploration of the Hawaiian Islands. Upon his return to Britain in October 1780, Vancouver was commissioned as a lieutenant and posted aboard the sloop HMS Martin, initially on escort and patrol duty in the English Channel and North Sea. He accompanied the ship when it left Plymouth on February 11, 1782 for the West Indies. On May 7, 1782 he was appointed 4th Lieutenant of the 74-gun ship of the line HMS Fame, which was at the time part of the British West Indies fleet and assigned to patrolling the French-held Leeward Islands. Vancouver returned to England in June 1783. In the late 1780s the Spanish Empire commissioned an expedition to the Pacific Northwest. The 1789 the Nootka crisis developed, and Spain and Britain came close to war over ownership of the Nootka Sound on contemporary Vancouver Island, and of greater importance, the right to colonize and settle the Pacific Northwest coast. Henry Roberts had recently taken command of the survey ship HMS Discovery, a new vessel named in honor of the ship on Cook's voyage, which was to be used on another round-the-world voyage, and Roberts selected Vancouver as his first lieutenant, but they were then diverted to other warships due to the crisis. Vancouver went with Joseph Whitby to the 74-gun ship of the line HMS Scourgeois. When the First Nootka Convention ended the crisis in 1790, Vancouver was given command of Discovery to take possession of Nootka Sound and to survey the coasts. Explorations. Vancouver Expedition. Departing England with two ships, HMS Discovery and HMS Chatham, on April 1, 1791, Vancouver commanded an expedition charged with exploring the Pacific region. In its first year the expedition traveled to Cape Town, Australia, New Zealand, Tahiti, and Hawaii, collecting botanical samples and surveying coastlines along the way. He formally claimed at Possession Point, King George Sound, Western Australia, now the town of Albany, Western Australia for the British. Proceeding to North America, Vancouver followed the coasts of present-day Oregon and Washington northward. In April 1792 he encountered American Captain Robert Gray off the coast of Oregon just prior to Gray's sailing up the Columbia River. Vancouver entered the Strait of Juan de Fuca, between Vancouver Island and the Washington state mainland on April 29, 1792. His orders included a survey of every inlet and outlet on the west coast of the mainland, all the way north to Alaska. Most of this work was in small craft propelled by both sail and oar. Maneuvering larger sail-powered vessels in uncharted waters was generally impractical and dangerous. Vancouver named many features for his officers, friends, associates, and his ship Discovery, including Vancouver was the second European to enter Burrard Inlet on June 13, 1792, naming it for his friend Sir Harry Burrard. It is the present-day main harbor area of the city of Vancouver beyond Stanley Park. He surveyed Howe Sound and Jervis Inlet over the next 9 days. Then, on his 35th birthday on June 22, 1792, he returned to Point Grey, the present-day location of the University of British Columbia. Here he unexpectedly met a Spanish expedition led by Dionisio Alcalá Galiano and Cayetano Valdés y Flores. Vancouver was mortified, His word, to learn they already had a crude chart of the Strait of Georgia based on the 1791 exploratory voyage of José María Narváez the year before, under command of Francisco de Eliza. For 3 weeks they cooperatively explored the Georgia Strait and the Discovery Islands area before sailing separately towards Nootka Sound. After the summer surveying season ended, in August 1792, Vancouver went to Nootka, then the region's most important harbor, on contemporary Vancouver Island. Here he was to receive any British buildings and lands returned by the Spanish from claims by Francisco de Eliza for the Spanish crown. The Spanish commander, Juan Francisco Bodega y Cuadra, was very cordial and he and Vancouver exchanged the maps they had made, but no agreement was reached. They decided to await further instructions. At this time, they decided to name the large island on which Nootka was now proven to be located as Quadra and Vancouver Island. Years later, as Spanish influence declined, the name was shortened to simply Vancouver Island. While at Nootka Sound, Vancouver acquired Robert Gray's chart of the lower Columbia River. Gray had entered the river during the summer before sailing to Nootka Sound for repairs. Vancouver realized the importance of verifying Gray's information and conducting a more thorough survey. In October 1792, he sent Lieutenant William Robert Broughton with several boats up the Columbia River. Broughton got as far as the Columbia River Gorge, sighting and naming Mount Hood. Vancouver sailed south along the coast of Spanish Alta California, visiting Chumash villages at Point Conception and near Mission San Buenaventura. Vancouver spent the winter in continuing exploration of the Sandwich Islands, the contemporary islands of Hawaii. Further explorations. The next year, 1793, he returned to British Columbia and proceeded further north, unknowingly missing the overland explorer Alexander Mackenzie by only 48 days. He got to 56 degrees and 30 minutes north, having explored north from Point Menzies and Burke Channel to the northwest coast of Prince of Wales Island. He sailed around the latter island, as well as circumnavigating Revillagigedo Island and charting parts of the coasts of Mitkof, Zarembo, Etolan, Wrangel, Ku'u, and Kuprianof Islands. With worsening weather, he sailed south to Alta California, hoping to find Bodega y Cuadra and fulfill his territorial mission, but the Spaniard was not there. He again spent the winter in the Sandwich Islands. In 1794, he first went to Cook Inlet, the northernmost point of his exploration, and from there followed the coast south. Boat parties charted the east coasts of Chicagof and Baranof Islands, circumnavigated Admiralty Island, explored to the head of Lynn Canal, and charted the rest of Ku'u Island and nearly all of Kuprianof Island. He then set sail for Great Britain by way of Cape Horn, returning in September 1795, thus completing a circumnavigation of South America. Later life. Impressed by the view from Richmond Hill, Vancouver retired to Petersham, London. Vancouver faced difficulties when he returned home to England. The accomplished and politically well-connected naturalist Archibald Menzies complained that his servant had been pressed into service during a shipboard emergency. Sailing master Joseph Whitby had a competing claim for pay as expedition astronomer, and Thomas Pitt, 2nd Baron Camelford, whom Vancouver had disciplined for numerous infractions and eventually sent home in disgrace, proceeded to harass him publicly and privately. Pitt's allies, including his cousin, Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger, attacked Vancouver in the press. Thomas Pitt took a more direct approach. On August 29, 1796, he sent Vancouver a letter heaping many insults on the head of his former captain, and challenging him to a duel. Vancouver gravely replied that he was unable in a private capacity to answer for his public conduct in his official duty, and offered instead to submit to formal examination by flag officers. Pitt chose instead to stalk Vancouver, ultimately assaulting him on a London street corner. The terms of their subsequent legal dispute required both parties to keep the peace, but nothing stopped Vancouver's civilian brother Charles from interposing and giving Pitt blow after blow until onlookers restrained the attacker. Charges and countercharges flew in the press, with the wealthy Camelford faction having the greater firepower until Vancouver, ailing from his long naval service, died. Death. Vancouver, at one time amongst Britain's greatest explorers and navigators, died in obscurity on May 10, 1798 at the age of 40, less than 3 years after completing his voyages and expeditions. No official cause of death was stated, as the medical records pertaining to Vancouver were destroyed. One doctor named John Nish claimed Vancouver died from kidney failure, while others believed it was a hyperthyroid condition. His grave is in the churchyard of St. Peter's Church, Petersham, in the London Borough of Richmond upon Thames, England. The Hudson's Bay Company placed a memorial plaque in the church in 1841. His grave in Portland stone, renovated in the 1960s, is now Grade II listed in view of its historical associations. Legacy. Navigation. Vancouver determined that the Northwest Passage did not exist at the latitudes that had long been suggested. His charts of the North American Northwest coast were so extremely accurate that they served as the key reference for coastal navigation for generations. Robin Fisher, the academic vice president of Mount Royal University in Calgary and author of 2 books on Vancouver, states. However, Vancouver failed to discover 2 of the largest and most important rivers on the Pacific coast, the Fraser River and the Columbia River. He also missed the Skeena River near Prince Rupert in northern British Columbia. Vancouver did eventually learn of the river before he finished his survey, from Robert Gray, captain of the American merchant ship that conducted the first Euro-American sailing of the Columbia River on May 11, 1792, after first sighting it on an earlier voyage in 1788. However, it and the Fraser River never made it onto Vancouver's charts. Stephen R. Bown, noted in Mercator's World magazine, November/December 1999, that while it is difficult to comprehend how Vancouver missed the Fraser River, much of this river's delta was subject to flooding and summer freshet which prevented the captain from spotting any of its great channels as he sailed the entire shoreline from Point Roberts, Washington, to Point Grey in 1792. The Spanish expeditions to the Pacific Northwest, with the 1791 Francisco de Eliza expedition preceding Vancouver by a year, had also missed the Fraser River, although they knew from its muddy plume that there was a major river located nearby. Indigenous peoples. Vancouver generally established a good rapport with both Indigenous peoples and European trappers. Historical records show Vancouver enjoyed good relations with native leaders both in Hawaii, where King Kamehameha I ceded Hawaii to Vancouver in 1794, as well as the Pacific Northwest and California. Vancouver's journals exhibit a high degree of sensitivity to natives. He wrote of meeting the Chumash people, and of his exploration of a small island on the Californian coast on which an important burial site was marked by a sepulchre of peculiar character lined with boards and fragments of military instruments lying near a square box covered with mats. Vancouver states. Vancouver also displayed contempt in his journals towards unscrupulous Western traders who provided guns to natives by writing. Robin Fisher notes that Vancouver's relationships with Aboriginal groups were generally peaceful. Indeed, his detailed survey would not have been possible if they had been hostile. While there were hostile incidents at the end of Vancouver's last season, the most serious of which involved a clash with Glinchets at Ben Canal in southeast Alaska in 1794, these were the exceptions to Vancouver's exploration of the U.S. and Canadian Northwest coast. Despite a long history of warfare between Britain and Spain, Vancouver maintained excellent relations with his Spanish counterparts and even feted a Spanish sea captain aboard his ship Discovery during his 1792 trip to the Vancouver region. Namesakes. Ship and cadet units. Places. Many places around the world have been named after George Vancouver, including Australia, Canada, New Zealand, United States. Memorials. Many collections were made on the voyage. One was donated by Archibald Menzies to the British Museum 1796, another made by Surgeon George Goodman Hewitt, 1765 to 1834, was donated by A.W. Franks to the British Museum in 1891. An account of these has been published. 250th birthday commemorations. Canada Post issued a $1.55 postage stamp to commemorate the 250th anniversary of Vancouver's birth, on June 22, 2007. The stamp has an embossed image of Vancouver seen from behind as he gazes forward towards a mountainous coastline. This may be the first Canadian stamp not to show the subject's face. The city of Vancouver in Canada organized a celebration to commemorate the 250th anniversary of Vancouver's birth, in June 2007 at the Vancouver Maritime Museum. The one-hour festivities included the presentation of a massive 63 by 114 centimeter carrot cake, the firing of a gun salute by the Royal Canadian Artillery's 15th Field Regiment and a performance by the Vancouver Firefighters Band. Vancouver's then mayor, Sam Sullivan, officially declared June 22, 2007 to be George Day. The Musqueam, XWM Theta KWYM, Elderesi Elk, Larry Grant, attended the festivities and acknowledged that some of his people might disapprove of his presence, but also noted origins of the family name. There has been some debate about the origins of the Vancouver name. It is now commonly accepted that the name Vancouver derives from the expression Van Coevorden, meaning, originating, from Coevorden, a city in the northeast of the Netherlands. This city is apparently named after the Coevorden family of the 13th–15th century. In the 16th century, a number of businessmen from the Coevorden area, and the rest of the Netherlands, moved to England. Some of them were known as Van Coevorden. Others adopted the surname Oxford, as in Oxenfording, a river, which is approximately the English translation of Coevorden. However, it is not the exact name of the noble family mentioned in the history books that claim Vancouver's noble lineage. That name was Coevorden, not Coevorden. In the 1970s, Adrian Mansvelt, a former consul general of the Netherlands based in Vancouver, published a collation of information in both historical and genealogical journals and in the Vancouver Sun newspaper. Mansvelt's theory was later presented by the city during the Expo 86 World's Fair, as historical fact. The information was then used by historian W. K. Lamb in his book A Voyage of Discovery to the North Pacific Ocean and Round the World, 1791–1795, 1984. W. K. Lamb, in summarizing Mansvelt's 1973 research, observes evidence of close family ties between the Vancouver family of Britain and the Van Coevorden family of the Netherlands, as well as George Vancouver's own words from his diaries in referring to his Dutch ancestry. In 2006, John Robson, a librarian at the University of Waikato, conducted his own research into George Vancouver's ancestry, which he published in an article in the British Columbia History Journal. Robson theorizes that Vancouver's forebears may have been Flemish rather than Dutch. He believes that Vancouver is descended from the Vanover family of Ipswich and Colchester in Essex. Those towns had a significant Flemish population in the 16th and 17th centuries. George Vancouver named the south point of what is now Coevorden Island, Alaska, Point Coevorden, during his exploration of the North American Pacific coast, in honor of his family's hometown of Coevorden. It is located at the western point of entry to Lynn Canal in southeastern Alaska. Works by George Vancouver. The Admiralty instructed Vancouver to publish a narrative of his voyage, which he started to write in early 1796 in Petersham. At the time of his death, the manuscript covered the period up to mid-1795. The work, A Voyage of Discovery to the North Pacific Ocean, and Round the World, was completed by his brother John and published in 3 volumes in the autumn of 1798. A second edition was published in 1801 in 6 volumes. A modern annotated edition, 1984, by W. K. Lamb was renamed The Voyage of George Vancouver 1791–1795, and published in 4 volumes by the Hakluyt Society of London, England. Volumes by the Hakluyt Society of London, England. Volumes by the Hakluyt Society of London.